evening, and thank you for lending us your ears tonight. It's time for Mimi and Pico TV. Welcome back to another deep dive. And wow, we've got some really fascinating material today. It's from a conversation with Kenjiro Kimura, and this person is thinking big, really big.
That's putting it mildly. The scope here is, well, it's vast.
Exactly. We're talking cutting-edge AI, the future of human life itself, maybe even ending death. And then there's this whole other angle on fundamental chemistry that could, I don't know, change everything.
It's a rich tapestry of ideas, certainly. Very ambitious.
I'm honestly super excited to unpack all this with you because, parts of it sound straight out of science fiction, but it's being discussed as, achievable stuff.
Indeed. And that's our goal here, isn't it? To take these complex, sometimes mind-bending concepts from the source material and break them down.
Yeah, make them accessible.
We want to guide you, the listener, through it all. Figure out what's really important, what the potential impacts are, and crucially, how these different threads, the AI, the biology, the chemistry, actually weave together. It's all part of a larger vision.
Consider us your guides on this exploration, then. We'll start with this pretty wild idea about how AI might learn differently in the future, something involving mountains.
Mm-hmm. The thought experiment.
Then we'll shift gears pretty dramatically to talk about, well, aiming to eliminate lifespan, seriously, and the tiny, tiny tech involved.
Nanotechnology, essentially.
Yeah.
Or even smaller.
Right. And finally, we'll dig into this potentially game-changing new theory in chemistry. So yeah, quite a journey ahead. Let's dive right in. Okay, so that first concept, it kicks off with this almost whimsical question from the source material. What if you put an AI robot all by itself way out in the mountains for, say, 10 years?
Mm-hmm. Just leave it there.
Yeah. No people, just nature. And the idea, I guess, is that it would have to learn about the physical world, wouldn't it? Really learn. Maybe even the source hints build something complex, a sort of mini civilization.
It's a fascinating thought experiment, as you said. It immediately throws into sharp relief how different human learning is from most current AI training.
How so?
Well, we humans learn, fundamentally, through physical interaction. Trial and error, picking things up, feeling gravity, getting rained on, maybe trying to build a fire, and failing a dozen times before figuring it out. It's messy, unpredictable physical feedback.
Right. We learn in the world, whereas AI mostly learns online in simulations.
Primarily, yes. They learn from vast data sets, patterns in text and images, or within highly structured virtual environments. They master tasks within the rules of the code. The mountain scenario pushes this idea of training in the physical world, or as the source puts it, training through direct, unmediated physical experience.
Because even the best VR simulation, it's still just that, right? A simulation. It can model physics, sure, but the real world is just infinitely more complex and random.
Precisely. No simulation can capture the sheer diversity, the unexpected nuances, the chaotic reality of the physical environment. And that's where Kenjiro Kimura's more practical vision comes in. Not the lone mountain robot, but a hybrid approach.
A hybrid approach. Okay, what does that involve?
It blends the strengths of both worlds.
Yeah.
Step one, as described in the source, involves doing the initial kind of rough training. The term used is in a virtual space.
So getting the basics down first.
Exactly. You teach the AI the fundamental physics models of the real world, basic gravity, object interaction, cause and effect. You can do a lot of that efficiently in a controlled simulation. Get the foundational understanding sorted.
Okay, that makes sense. Do the groundwork virtually. What's step two?
Step two is where the scale just explodes. After this initial virtual training, the plan is to deploy a massive number of these AIs into the actual physical world. The source says, each bringing them in large quantities.
How large are we talking?
The number mentioned is 1 million. 107. 1 million physical AI units deployed.
1 million? Wow, that number just jumps out. The source uses the example of maybe people owning them, like 1 million dog-like robots out there living alongside us.
That's one possibility floated, yes. It paints a picture of these AIs not being isolated in labs, but integrated into various real-world environments. And the key here is the parallelism.
Parallelism? You mean that they're all learning at the same time?
Exactly. Imagine 1 million units spread out, each encountering slightly different situations, different challenges, different physical inputs. They're all learning simultaneously and potentially sharing that learning. This massively accelerates the evolutionary process. The speed of adaptation becomes phenomenal compared to one unit learning alone.
Okay, I can see how that would speed things up, but I remember the reaction in the source. Corey's immediate thought was, they'll just get killed, right? Which, honestly, sounds pretty realistic. The real world isn't safe.
It's a very pragmatic reaction, isn't it? And a valid concern. Physical robots in uncontrolled environments face countless hazards. But that reaction also points towards the deeper implications.
What implications?
If these AIs can survive and adapt that quickly in the physical world, they could become indispensable almost overnight. Imagine tools or helpers that learn and improve physically at that speed. But the flip side, also mentioned in the source, is the idea that they might become problematic, or perhaps implying they evolve beyond our control or needs, maybe even surpass us in ways that make us feel unnecessary or vulnerable.
Yeah.
The double-edged sword.
That's a lot to think about. So for you listening, consider this. AI not just as code, but as physical robots, maybe dog-shaped, maybe something else, living among us, learning from our messy world incredibly fast. How does that change your picture of the future? It's way beyond just chatting with an AI online, isn't it?
It fundamentally alters the relationship between humans and artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
From that potential future, let's now pivot to something even more personal, more fundamental, our own biology and the very concept of mortality.
Right, this is where the ambition just goes off the charts.
Yeah.
Kenjiro Kimura's personal goal, stated right there in the source, eliminate human lifespan. Not just add a few years, but get rid of the limit altogether.
It's a staggering objective.
And he wants to do it within 50 to 100 years. And the really striking part, he wants it done before he dies. That adds such a powerful personal drive to it all.
It transforms it from a purely scientific curiosity into a deeply felt mission. And the rationale behind it, the why, is fascinating. According to the source, he views our limited lifespan as a root cause of conflict.
Like wars and fighting over resources.
Exactly. The idea is that mortality breeds urgency, competition, maybe even a certain kind of selfishness focused on the short term. If you remove that fundamental clock ticking down,
maybe humanity could finally focus on bigger things together.
That's the hope expressed, that we could pursue shared, grand goals. If time wasn't the limiting factor, perhaps cooperation would replace conflict.
The source gives that amazing example, needing 5,000 years to meet aliens, 5,000 Shri, 5,000 tools. I mean, if you suddenly had millennia to play with, the kinds of projects you could even consider, it changes everything. It reframes our entire perspective on time and possibility. And the technology proposed to enable this biological revolution is the microprobe. Microprobes. And these come directly from his previous work, right? Working at an incredibly small scale.
Precisely. His background, as the source emphasizes, involved controlling individual atoms and molecules. We're talking about manipulating the absolute smallest units of matter. The examples given are vivid. Moving a single atom one position over, or shifting one strand of DNA, DNA 1-1.
Moving atoms. That's almost impossible to picture. It makes current medical robots seem, well, enormous.
They are, comparatively. The source draws that contrast clearly. Today's most advanced surgical robots operate at the sub-milli level, maybe 100, 200 microns, 200 paws. A human hair is maybe 50 to 100 microns thick. So current tech works at the scale of cells.
Okay, and then microprobes.
The goal is manipulation at the atomic or molecular level. We're talking scales millions of times smaller than a micron, a completely different realm of precision.
And the things he imagines doing with these probes, especially in the brain, it sounds like something from a cyberpunk novel, like knocking off specific nerve circuits.
Big activating them.
Or the reverse, turning circuits on, activating pathways, and even more radically, physically connecting different parts of the brain. Air. Like literally wiring them together.
The source mentions using local soldering technology. It implies a kind of nanoscale construction inside the brain, re-engineering the neural architecture.
Wow. And this leads to this idea of treating the brain, less like biology and more like hardware, like a computer chip.
Yes, the analogy used is a programmable computer, or more specifically, an FPGA. An FPGA chip can be reconfigured after it's made. The implication is that the brain, too, could become something malleable, programmable, repairable at this micro level.
Which then leads to the most radical idea of all, wanting to replace parts of it, getting rid of the organic stuff.
That desire is stated quite explicitly.
wanting to replace organic tissue, denesushin, with more durable or controllable materials like semiconductors and metal seam. It's the ultimate expression of wanting a mechanical body, or at least a partially mechanical one, perhaps seen as more resilient and easier to maintain indefinitely.
But does he think this is actually feasible? Like, the basic tech exists.
His assessment, according to the source, is yes. The fundamental ability to manipulate matter at that scale, the Dugene Fien, is either there or within grasp, based on his previous work. The huge challenge is the engineering, scaling it up, integrating it, making it work safely and reliably within a living system. He frames it as something achievable with hard work, days. A massive engineering problem, but not necessarily a fundamental scientific barrier.
And they are actually testing this stuff. The source mentioned mice.
Yes, experiments on mice were apparently completed.
Okay.
And the next step, according to the source, is moving on to experiments with monkeys.
Monkeys. Wow. That's getting much closer to humans.
It signifies a significant step towards potential human applications, absolutely. Though countless ethical and technical hurdles obviously remain.
This whole area, it's not just about living longer, is it? It's about fundamentally changing what we are, integrating technology into our bodies at the most basic level, replacing organic parts. I mean, how do you feel about that listening right now? The idea of swapping out bits of your biological self for manufactured components to achieve immortality or enhanced abilities, it's a profound question to wrestle with.
And from manipulating biology at the atomic level, we transition now to manipulating chemistry itself, tackling a fundamental problem that has long vexed scientists.
Right. This is the third big pillar, cracking chemistry calculations, specifically when temperature gets involved at Taban. I kind of assumed our supercomputers could already do that pretty well.
They can do some calculations, yes. Predicting molecule stability, simulating very simple reactions. But the source makes a critical distinction. These calculations generally work only under the assumption of extremely low temperatures, near absolute zero.
Why is low temperature the key? Why is that easier?
Because at those incredibly low temperatures, electrons behave themselves, relatively speaking. They're less energetic, they stick close to their atoms, they act more like predictable little particles orbiting a nucleus. When everything is relatively static and well-behaved, the math is manageable.
Okay, cold electrons are easy electrons. So what happens when you heat things up, like in a real chemical reaction, when things are actually, reacting?
That's exactly where the conventional methods break down. As the temperature rises, the electrons absorb energy. They get excited like waves. They stop acting like neat particles and start behaving much more like waves or if Oeris. You know that simple picture of electrons like tiny planets orbiting a sun? The source even calls it out as oversimplified. At reaction temperatures, that picture is completely wrong.
So they become fuzzy, hard to pin down. Exactly. They become waves of probability, spread out, interacting in incredibly complex ways. And trying to track all those energetic, wave-like interactions between countless electrons across multiple atoms as bonds break and form, the calculation just explodes. As shown, it becomes computationally impossible with existing theoretical frameworks.
So the bottom line is, currently, nobody can really calculate what happens in a chemical reaction if you factor in the temperature accurately. That's the problem Kimura set out to solve. And importantly, as the source stresses, just getting a bigger supercomputer doesn't help.
Right, you said that before. It's not about raw power.
No, because the method itself is flawed for this problem. A faster computer running a fundamentally inadequate method still gives you an explosion array. It's like trying to predict a hurricane by tracking every single raindrop individually. You need a different approach, a statistical one, not just more power for the impossible task. The core issue is you just don't know where the electrons are, or how they're behaving collectively when things get hot.
Which is where his specific theory comes in. The finite temperature density functional theory. Yeah, Quite a mouthful.
It is. But the core idea is groundbreaking. It provides the mathematical tools, the equations, to actually handle this complexity.
How does it do that? How does it stop the calculation from exploding?
In essence, it finds a clever way to manage the explosion endurance so you can still get meaningful results. Instead of trying to track every impossible detail, it uses concepts from statistical mechanics. Think of it like predicting the pressure of a gas. You don't track every molecule. You use statistics to calculate the average behavior. This theory applies similar sophisticated calculation techniques, Ajun, to essentially calculate the overall electronic behavior during a reaction at temperature, suppressing the computational chaos section. It's a statistical shortcut to the right answer.
Okay, so it's a new mathematical lens, a way to calculate chemistry with temperature included. What's the grand vision for using this theory?
The goal is nothing short of creating an infinite database of chemical reactions and infinite
By using computers, running this new theory to constantly calculate what happens when you mix anything with anything else, at any temperature, any pressure. 247, 200 away. Just computationally experimenting, asking, what if I mix this and this under these conditions? So instead of chemists doing slow, expensive, sometimes dangerous experiments in a lab, computers are just running virtual experiments nonstop, trillions of them.
Precisely, building up this vast, predictive library of chemical knowledge. And the vision is, when you need something new, a drug for a new virus, a material with specific properties, you query the database. The computer predicts the entire reaction pathway, all the steps, catalysts, temperatures needed to make it sign strange on. Shuari. It generates the perfect recipe. And then it sends the recipe to a factory. The source mentions something about a factory made inside a dice.
Yeah, that sounds metaphorical, doesn't it? It likely suggests a highly automated, perhaps miniaturized production system. Think robotic labs, microfluidics, maybe even 3D printing molecules. The point is, the computer-generated recipe goes directly to this automated system. Robots synthesize the compound, Xingfrangen off the area. It gets delivered. A fully automated pipeline from idea to substance.
That's fundamentally different from how AI is used in chemistry now, isn't it?
Absolutely. This source highlights this crucial distinction. Current AI mostly learns from data humans have generated through past experiments. It optimizes based on what we already discovered.
But this new approach.
This approach lets the computer generate the fundamental data itself, Wheater's in the street. It's not learning from human history, it's calculating the possibilities from first principles. That's the disruption.
Wow. Okay, think about that for a second, everyone. An infinite library of chemical recipes generated by computers. What could you create? How would that change medicine, materials, energy? It feels like a whole new era for chemistry.
And to show this wasn't just theory, the source highlights a key early success, a proof of concept.
Ah, yes, the water calculation. H2 plus O2 makes H2O, which, again, sounds simple, but you're saying calculating the process was the big deal.
Exactly. We all know hydrogen and oxygen make water if you add a spark. But before this theory, no computer could actually calculate the dynamic reaction, showing the atoms rearranging, the bonds breaking and forming as the temperature changes. The source says explicitly, nobody could calculate that when you mix this and this, light a fire and pop, this is created.
Successfully simulating that entire transformation, showing water being born, using the theory was a huge validation. And it proved it wasn't just about needing more computer power, but needing the right method.
Correct. The source reiterates that point. Supercomputers using the old methods still hit the wall. The problem was, the theory couldn't handle the complex electron behavior at reaction temperatures. It needed that new statistical approach, air.
Okay, so calculating water proved the concept for a simple two-molecule reaction. What's the next big challenge they're aiming for with this?
The source points to something even more complex, calculating reactions where 3 or even 4 molecules collide and react simultaneously, 3O or 4EO.
3 or 4 things hitting at the exact same time? Does that even happen much?
In nature and in most lab chemistry we understand, it's rare. Most reactions are modeled as two-body interactions. Molecule A hits B, then the result hits C, and so on. It's sequential. The probability of 3 or 4 specific molecules arriving at the same point with the right orientation and energy all at once is very low.
So we can't really study those multi-body reactions easily in the real world.
It's incredibly difficult, which means calculating them predictively is something perhaps only a computer using this kind of advanced theory could do.
And why bother? What's the potential payoff of understanding these rare, complex collisions?
The potential is enormous, because these multi-body reactions could, in theory, create substances that are effectively impossible to form through standard two-body pathways. Substances impossible naturally, JQNR.
Impossible how? Like fundamentally new types of materials.
Potentially, yes. Materials with extreme properties, perhaps incredibly high energy density or reaction efficiency. The source floats the idea of designing super-efficient fuels. The ultimate dream mentioned is almost fantasy, a single stick that could power things for a year. It's about using computation to unlock reaction pathways nature never found to create revolutionary materials.
Computationally designed unobtainium, basically. That's mind-blowing. The idea that we could mathematically design and then create materials that simply couldn't exist otherwise. If you could ask the computer to design any impossible material, what would you wish for? Super strong and light, self-healing, the list is endless.
And while pushing the boundaries of what's computationally possible, this work also draws inspiration from the efficiency of nature's own chemistry.
You mean like that enzyme you mentioned earlier, the nitrogenase?
Exactly. It's a prime example of nature's ingenuity. Found in microbes in the roots of legumes, it takes nitrogen from the air, which is very inert, and converts it to ammonia, a crucial building block for life. And the astonishing part is, it does this at room temperature and normal pressure, whereas our industrial process, the Haber-Bosch process, needs insane temperatures and pressures, right?
Immense energy input, yes. Hundreds of degrees, hundreds of atmospheres. Nitrogenase does the same fundamental chemistry under ambient conditions. Nature, through evolution, found an incredibly elegant and efficient pathway that still baffles us in its details.
Because we don't fully understand how it works at the atomic level. The source said its structure and mechanism are still kind of a mystery.
That's right. The precise dance of atoms and electrons within that complex enzyme molecule is too intricate for us to fully map or simulate accurately with current tools. Which brings us back to the potential disruption of Kimura's theory.
How does it connect back?
Well, remember, current AI learns from the chemical reactions we have already done and documented. AI is AI. It's limited by human experimental history.
Right. But Kimura's theory lets the computer generate new chemical knowledge from calculations.
Exactly. So potentially, a computer running this theory could not only discover entirely new reactions, but could perhaps simulate and finally understand the complex mechanisms of enzymes like nitrogenase, or design artificial catalysts that mimic that efficiency. The source suggests this kind of breakthrough wasn't made earlier because people were focused on brute force computation, rather than seeking a fundamentally new calculation method, Ye-ji, an insight likened to those made by physicists like Fermi-Erriget, finding clever ways around computational roadblocks.
So it was about thinking differently, not just computing harder. And this computational power could revolutionize practical fields, like drug discovery.
That's a major potential application highlighted in the source. Finding new drugs often involves searching for small molecules, Kai Fermi, that can interact with specific biological targets, like receptors. The example given was finding something to activate a hibernation receptor.
And the big challenge there is getting drugs into the brain, past the blood-brain barrier, the BD-BBR. Which usually requires small molecules. Often, yes. And the current process described is painstaking. They found something in frog mucus that worked a bit on the hibernation receptor in mice, but it was big and weak. So the work involves isolating the active part, shrinking it, tweaking its shape. It's slow, iterative chemistry. Hori's comment about it seeming like it could be done quickly is interpreted as highlighting how slow it actually is.
Okay, so that's the slow, traditional way. How would the new computational approach change drug discovery?
Radically. Instead of starting with frog mucus and trying to modify it, the computer, using the new theory and the infinite database, could potentially design the perfect molecule from scratch. Design it specifically to activate the target and cross the BBB.
Design it digitally first.
Yes.
And not just design the molecule, but also calculate the entire synthesis pathway, the exact reactions, temperatures, catalysts, everything needed to make it Xian'ershi. This leads directly to that automated factory concept. Design, predict synthesis, manufacture automatically, hollow one.
The sheer scale of that. Because the computer is constantly doing these calculations of you, the library of potential chemicals just keeps growing.
It effectively becomes infinite like AI generating infinite music, but for molecules. Compare that to today, where we often search existing databases, maybe repurposing old drugs because they're already tested. This new way could create entirely novel compounds tailored for any purpose.
It's shifting from discovery to pure design and creation. Having an infinite chemical library, how does that change things for you? Personalized medicine designed instantly. Materials engineered atom by atom. It feels like a completely different world.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, it's really important to circle back to the underlying motivation behind all these incredible technological ambitions, the AI, the life extension, the chemistry. It's not just science for science's sake.
No, it all seems connected to this fundamental belief about humanity and its problems.
Exactly. The source brings it up again and again. The conviction that our finite lifespan is the root cause of so much conflict and waste. That wars and resource battles are ultimately driven by mortality. He sees that cycle as profoundly empty or meaningless.
And so, the grand vision is that if we remove that fundamental limitation, if we achieve radical life extension or even eliminate aging,
then humanity can finally shift its focus away from conflict towards shared positive goals. White chair. The idea being that if everyone has potentially unlimited time and the resource pressures are lessened, cooperation becomes the natural mode. That's the explicit hope articulated, that shared long-term goals would unite people. Like the 5,000-year project to meet aliens. A goal so vast, it requires everyone working together for millennia.
It illustrates the scale of thinking. The proposed logic is no lifespan limit, no war scarcity, common goals, cooperation, everyone united towards a single purpose. Hiran Ochai. It's an incredibly utopian vision, really.
And just as a final interesting point, the source touched on how this kind of world-changing work might intersect with something like the Nobel Prize. Yes, it's mentioned that Kimura himself seems more focused on the practical outcomes, the things people can actually use a new drug, a new material, than on the theoretical prize itself. But Hori had that interesting perspective, apparently from a university president, that for practical inventions, the Nobel Committee looks at real-world impact. Hori likes real-world impact, human dreams, and even market size. That was the insight shared, yes. That for engineering or applied science Nobels, the tangible effect on the world, sometimes measured economically, can be a significant factor.
They gave examples, didn't they? Like the blue LED.
Shuji Nakamura's blue LED, Curzon, Hiruli, yes. And also titanium oxide, Koche, used in antibacterial coatings, apparently a massive market. These were presented as cases where huge impact and market size likely played a role in the Nobel decision.
So the conclusion was that Kimura's chemistry work, if it delivers on even a fraction of its potential infinite drugs, new materials, energy breakthroughs, the sheer impact could make him a strong contender for a Nobel.
That was Hori's assessment based on that framework. It connects the highest scientific recognition back to tangible, world-altering consequences.
Well, this has certainly been a journey. We've gone from AI learning in the mountains, to molecular brain surgery for immortality, to calculating infinite chemical recipes, all tied together by this grand vision of overcoming death to unify humanity. It really leaves you spinning, doesn't it?
It covers a vast intellectual territory. We started with that hybrid AI training virtual then physical deployment, potentially millions of units learning simultaneously.
Then dove into the quest to eliminate lifespan using microprobes, maybe even becoming partly mechanical in the process.
And spent significant time on the finite temperature density functional theory. Its potential to revolutionize chemistry by calculating reactions at temperature, leading to that infinite database and automated synthesis, not to mention tackling multi-body reactions.
And seeing how it all connects back to this core idea that technology, by solving fundamental problems like mortality and chemical synthesis, could pave the way for a future free of conflict, focused on shared long-term goals.
The real aha moment is perhaps seeing how a breakthrough in fundamental physics understanding electron behavior could ripple outwards to potentially reshape medicine, materials science, and even human destiny and cooperation on a millennial scale.
It definitely leaves us with that final provocative question. If we could overcome our biological limits, if we could set aside conflict, what grand unifying purpose should humanity pursue together across the ages? What's worthy of that kind of future? Something to ponder. See you next time on Mimi and Pico TV.